Well, good evening. I was talking, I forget which video I was talking on now, but I was talking about climate zones. There's, here in the western United States, there's two different, that I know of, two different charts or agencies that explain or divide the geographic areas into climate zones. And the USDA is one of them, and they have, there's 10 or 11 climate zones in the USDA categories, and then there's some subcategories, and that's what most plant producers and people that sell plants will use the USDA climate zone charts to tell you whether or not the plant you're purchasing or the whatever plant you're working with, to tell you whether or not that plant will grow in your area. And the other one that is very, very popular amongst gardeners west of, in the western United States, let's say, is the Sunset Western Garden book. The newer edition of this book the newer edition has better maps. This map is okay, and it's, an experienced gardener is not going to have any problems with it. When you see the climate zones that are in this part of you can see this is San Diego right here. I think the newer maps in the newer editions have more of a Google type map that's more accurate. But this is where I work in San Diego, right here on this little peninsula. And the climate there is zone 24. And to get to where I live, which is Lakeside, I think that's, yeah, Lakeside right there. That's where I live. I know that's where I live, but it's right on the border between 21 and 23. So the areas that I garden in are climate zones 24, 23, and 21. I live in an area that's known as a floodplain. There's behind where my home is a small creek that every 100 years or so it reaches flood stage, and the house that I live in is actually in a flood zone. So it's a little nerve-wracking sometimes if we start getting a lot of rain. Now, in this part of the book, as you turn past the maps, it actually explains Zone 21 is a thermal belt in the Southern California section of occasional ocean influence. So I'm actually in a little canyon area, and the climate from the ocean, which is like a buffer to keep the weather nice, it stays. So it doesn't get real cold here where I live. I'm about 20 miles or so east of downtown San Diego. 23 was the other one. Thermal belts of Southern California, and you can read through here, and it tells you what that means. And then, of course, 24 is a marine influence along the Southern California. And 24 is where I work. I work in an area known as Point Loma, which is the peninsula that protects the Bay of San Diego. And I work on the western side of that peninsula slope. So my office actually faces the Pacific Ocean. I'm a gardener for the school that I work at, but I'm a supervising gardener, so I have an office. And I tell people I'm a gardener, and then I tell them I have an office, and they look at me like, well, how can you have an office if you work outdoors? But I do supervise other gardeners, so I have to have an office to take care of some paperwork. That said, any good gardener worth his weight would find and study the climate zones that they're in to know what kind of plants they can grow. And in the back of this Sunset Western Garden book, in the center part of the book is an encyclopedia or a dictionary of plants listed and growing requirements and care requirements for those plants. And part of the description, it'll tell you what zone that particular plant will grow in. Let me see if I can find one that's an example that everybody's going to know. Let's see. Okay. Cauliflower. Now, cauliflower, it's interesting. Let's see. Right here it says it's an annual, biennial, grown as an annual. Cauliflower is here in California, in Southern California, we call it a winter crop because our winters are so mild in Southern California, it never gets cold enough to freeze the members of the cole family, which is cauliflowers and broccoli and Brussels sprouts. Those are all cold crops, and they tolerate quite a bit of cold weather. In fact, they don't like the hot weather. And cauliflower is one of those plants. It says it grows in all zones. Well, of course it grows in all zones because it's a very versatile plant. But if you look in the back of this book, and let me flip back here to the back, past the Z section, A, B, C, Z. Oops, I went too far. Oh no, you know what? In this edition, in the newer edition, I'm looking in the back. In the newer edition, what I'm looking for is in the back, and it's a chart that tells you when to plant that plant in your zone. Here, you look. I think it's under vegetables. If you look under RSTUV, let's see if I can find it. Well, I'm not going to be able to find it, but it's in a different location in this particular book. And I've used it so many times, I know the chart and when to plant. But maybe it's in the front section in this book. There's other... Yeah, I bet it's in the front. At work I use the newest edition, and it's in the back. But there's a chart, and the chart will list the vegetables in it, starting with asparagus and goes all the way through zucchini or whatever. And it lists those kinds of vegetables that you would normally grow in a home garden. And across that's up and down, right? And across the chart, it will list zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and all the way down to zone 24, which is the most mildest of the zones in the Sunset Western Garden book. So 1 is the most severe climate. This is where the areas that people that live in Sunset Western Garden Zone Climate 1 have the coldest weather, the hardest winters. Those that live in 24, Climate Zone 24, have the most mildest weather. And that's where I garden. So I have a 365-day growing season, which is really kind of nice. The problem is that if you're used to growing in a cold climate, you're planting your garden in a cold climate, and then you move to a warmer climate, you have to learn the new times to be planting your tomatoes or whatever it is you're growing. And the idea, especially for the colder climates, if you're going to plant tomatoes in the warm season crops, you need to plant at a time where they will reach maturity before it gets too cold. And that chart will tell you what to do, how to do that. And also in in that chart, there are 2 climate zones that are fairly new to Sunset Western Garden book, and it's called H1 and H2. So those of you that live in Hawaii have your own 2 climate zones. So H1 climate zone and H2 climate zone, H1 being a little more severe weather than the H2. Climate zones H1, 2, climate zones from 21 through 24, and then H1 and H2 are very, very similar. They're not that far apart. So it's a warm climate zone that I work in and grow my garden in. I wanted you to see this book because this is one of the most valuable tools that a gardener will ever have, is this particular book. There's lots of really good books. Reader's Digest makes a wonderful book. I think it's called the Reader's Digest Dictionary of Gardens or something like that. It's a wonderful book. I don't even know if it's in publication. It's still in publication. But the copy I have, I paid like $1 for it at a yard sale. And then there's some really technical type volumes that you can get once you've gained a certain expertise and start learning the Latin names. And it's good to know the Latin names because I just read to you from this part of the book about cauliflower. Well, most of the vegetables are listed under their common given names, but all the other plants are listed under their Latin names. And it's in some other video I'll talk about Latin names and the importance of using Latin names for plants. Well, just to give you a quick example, down in parts of Texas, there's a creature, a garden problem creature that's called a gopher. And I think one of my videos, in fact, I even talk about this. I have a picture, a video that I did on how to set gopher traps here in Southern California. When you're in Texas, that part of Texas that have these turtle gophers, and gopher turtles, or they're often called, they're turtles, they're reptiles. Here in California, what we call a gopher is a pocket gopher. So when you use common names, you can be talking about two entirely different species. And the same thing happens in the plant world. So we try to always use Latin names because Latin names are specific to specific plants. So, and I just kind of explained that a little bit there with the idea that a turtle gopher is a reptile, a pocket gopher is a mammal. So the mammal and the reptiles, we know that they're completely different. And it can become confusing unless we use Latin names. There's a lot of technical information that really is helpful that found in these kinds of books. But I wanted you to see this one, and like I say, I meant to bring the other book, the newer version, and it's a lot easier to use because everything is, the pages are all separated by color. And in the back it has the chart. This one has a chart also, but I'm not sure exactly where it is. And that chart is very useful when you're planting a vegetable garden. Now, one of the things I always tell people when I'm teaching them how and when to plant your tomatoes or whatever, corn, whatever you're planting, I always tell people, go to the chart that's in the book, look it up, and see what your window is. And if most of the time the chart, and I'm sure you can find seeds started at a certain time. And it's usually 4 to 6 weeks earlier or something like that. And that way the seedlings will be large enough to be set out at the time that they're being planted. So the charts are almost always, unless it's a root crop, the charts are almost always geared or written so that it tells you when it's time to set plants out, not to put seed in the ground. Root crops don't transplant very well. By root crops I mean tomatoes, carrots and turnips and beets and onions and scallions, those things that the edible part of the plant is underground. Those plants don't transplant very well. So we plant the seeds directly in the ground usually. Not always, but usually. Many of the plants will do okay. Onions do well if you transplant them. Carrots will do okay. But what happens is when you transplant them, you slow their growth down for a few weeks while they adjust. So that's why root crops don't do as well as other kinds of plants. that you plant in the vegetable garden. I hope that was helpful, and I thank you for watching. This seems I'm getting better at this, I think, and I'm hoping that you're learning something, because that's what is in me, is this teaching thing that I have. This I don't know. I think God implanted this teaching mode in me that I get into. I don't get to sit and talk to the camera very often because I'm a little embarrassed about talking out loud like this. So I have to do it when no one's around. Tonight my wife is off to a movie with some friends, and so I'm home alone, and so I get to add some video to my I'm calling it my blog. I'm looking for a handle because that's my nickname. Everybody calls me Uncle Jim, but then I've learned when I was posting, in fact, one of my early videos I posted, I used the name Uncle Jim, and then I thought I better research and see. I don't want to use the same name that someone else is using. So anyway, Gardener Jim or whatever, I'll find something. But Uncle Jim has already been taken. Many of my former students call me Grandpa. Most of my students now call me, when I call them my students, they're students that work with me. As you know, or have, if you've watched any of my other videos, I work at a private college here in San Diego that is probably one of the most beautiful college campuses in America. And if you talk to anybody about, and I don't want to name the campus because I don't have their permission to use them in my videos, but think of just know that there's a private college in the Point Loma area of San Diego, and if you ask anybody that's ever been on the campus, they will tell you it is the most beautiful campus in America. It has the most beautiful baseball field for our baseball team in the world. It's when you hit a ball in that ballpark, it goes over the fence. It looks like it's going to land in the ocean. It's absolutely beautiful, and we're very, very proud of it. When I say my students, I'm talking about the students that I work with at that school, because many of the students work in our department, and they earn money to help pay their tuition. It's a wonderful program and helps a lot. So it's I teach them how to garden and how to work, basically. It's a good thing for them, and it feeds my soul as well. So I really enjoy where I work, and I hope I can work there forever. It's a wonderful thing, a gift that God has given me to be able to work there. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I really hope you make some comments down below and share the link with friends that you garden with, or that you know garden. Press like or dislike, whichever, and help me get a gathering so I can do some more of these videos and help people understand what gardening is all about. Thank you. Good night.